Right, so good afternoon everyone. So welcome to Bali Bungkus today. So the Bali Bungkus today is about JavaScript for beginners. Before I start, I would like to give you a couple of announcements about Ubud. So my name is Vito Bersaldi and I am the head of learning and experience here at Ubud. But if you would like to speak maybe in the future, you can also come to Ian or Kashfi, events coordinators and events interns. Basically, if you're new at Ubud, we have a lot of events here and we give opportunity for people to share their skills and also so you can learn from others and hopefully be happier and also grow. But since we are almost the end of the week, we don't have any learning event for tomorrow, but we do have a networking event at the Jungle Fish. So it starts at 6 if I'm correct. 5. So it starts at 5. It's a bit far from here, like 20 minutes driving, 10, 15 to 20. It really depends on how fast you drive, of course. We hope that you don't drive fast, too fast. But it's really nice. It's one of the biggest pool in Ubud, and normally you will have to pay entrance of 150,000 to get in. But because of our partnership, you can enter level 2 for free tomorrow. But today's speakers. So today we have Daniel. Am I correct? Yeah, Daniel and Dirk. But the one who's speaking today is Daniel, and you graduated from an entrepreneur's. You graduated from Shenzhen in China.
No, I graduated from the University of Amsterdam on a project regarding Shenzhen in China.
Project regarding Shenzhen. Okay. Well, I think you will introduce yourself anyway.
Yeah.
So please help me to welcome Daniel.
Right. Hey guys. I think before I'm going to introduce myself, I'm going to give Dirk the word. So.
Exactly. Everybody wants to grab a minute of your attention. So we are Levagon. We're a full stack program. We're based down in Canggu. What we do, we have a 2-month program learning full stack, front and back end. We teach HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Ruby on Rails, and bring people from 0 to junior developer level. Very intense, very fast paced. And then what we do on the side is we give those free workshops, obviously to promote ourselves and also to give back to the community. And yeah, if you're interested in our full stack program or further workshops we give, talk to us after the course. And for now, enjoy JavaScript for beginners. Thanks.
All right, thanks Dirk. Hey guys, my name is Daniel. So I'm from Amsterdam. Like he said, I graduated in 2015, I think it was, and graduated in sociology on thesis regarding young entrepreneurs in Shenzhen. So that's the border region in China next to Hong Kong. And afterwards, I didn't really know what to do, so did a few months working in a bar, and then after a while, I stumbled upon Le Wagon and did the course. It was in 2016. After that, I did an internship, kind of like a traineeship. Then I worked for a company for a little over than a year. And then in November last year, I quit my job and started working for Le Wagon. And since then, I've been to Brussels, and now I'm here, and today I'm flying to Sydney. And then afterwards, going to Melbourne, hopefully coming back here to do teaching and TAing and all that kind of stuff. So that's about me. As you can see, that's me. So what we do at Le Wagon, we bring technical skills to creative people. I think Dirk already introduced us, so that's good. Let me talk you to the schedule for today. I kind of divided it up into 2 parts. So we're first going to see, we're going to do some basic JavaScript things. So learn about the language. So we're going to talk about data types, variables, conditions, loops, and functions. And then afterwards, in part 2, I'm going to take you into the DOM and into the browser and see what we can do with JavaScript and jQuery. And then a small introduction to Ajax. Right, so let's talk about some JavaScript. First of all, JavaScript is definitely not Java. So if you ever have any interview regarding programming languages, please do not mix these 2 things up because you're going to look really stupid. So JavaScript is a scripting language, and Java is an object-oriented language. Well, basically with JavaScript you can also do object-oriented stuff, but it's mainly a scripting language. So it's an in-browser language. It's next to HTML and CSS. It's the only languages that your browser understands. So HTML is for the content and the structure. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. CSS is styling, so making it look pretty. Stands for cascading style sheets, and then JavaScript is dynamism and usability. So using JavaScript, we can dynamically update, add, remove content to the browser and to our HTML documents. Okay, so let me give you a small showcase of what you can do. Oh, before we actually start doing some stuff. So let's go to Le Wagon. Okay. Oh. So if I click on this small button, it just shows us a pop-up menu. So you all know this stuff. This is not rocket science. But actually what it's doing, this is firing some JavaScript code. Clicking on the button, so the browser is listening for an event, a click event, then registering that event, and once you click it, it opens up a small menu. So what we can do using JavaScript, instead of actually clicking on the button, so do you guys know how to open the developer tools? You can do that with Control, so basically right click and then inspect. So if we do, let's see, so let's get this guy. So not, and then instead of actually clicking on it, we can simulate the click. So this is all that's happening once you click on something. It's just the browser registering JavaScript and executing the code. So what you can also do is hide the whole button, then click on it, now it's gone. So this was just a small showcase. I'm going to explain how this works later. You're not supposed to get it out of the box. So when I write my JavaScript, I like to use a couple of tools. So first of all, we use Sublime Text. Basically, when you're writing code, you're just writing text. But you're not going to use Word, because Word is made for writing stories and whatever, papers, just basic text. When you write code, you're going to use like a code editor. So Sublime Text is a free code editor which you can use, which has amazing customizability features. And you can download it for free. I think you can use it for free for a very long time, and after a while it gets like an annoying pop-up which which you have to click away. But it's still, I think it's not that expensive. It's like 70 euros or $70 if you want to buy it. So if you're into it, we usually say if you're still using it for free after 2 years, maybe it's time to buy it. So then secondly, we have JSBin. So that's this. Oh, before we go on to data types, that's this online tool. So if you open a new JSBin, it always starts out with HTML. So it starts out with raw. Can you see this? That's a little bit weird. Can we fix this? Can you move this a little bit more to the
I think
right?
you go in your like system preferences on your laptop and change the
Okay.
resolution.
Let's see. And then nope. Okay, so wait, what if I do this? Right. Okay. Good enough. So it always starts out with this HTML stuff, but since we're just going to write JavaScript, we can click that away and just click on JavaScript and then the console, because in the console we will see our output of what we're actually writing. So for example, when I want to write 3 plus 4, every programming language will have additions in it. So if I do 3 plus 4, what will it show to me? Nothing, because we need to log it to the console. So when you want to have some feedback about what's happening, you can insert a console log statement. You can also do this inside your code. So when you're writing really big functions, you can just console log, and then when you run your code in the browser, it will, inside your console, so that's this guy over here, it will show you what you're logging actually. So about JS bin, it's just a nice interactive playground basically where you can just write some JavaScript and fool around. Okay, so firstly, let's talk about some data types. So do you guys know why we use data types, or do you guys know a specific data type? Yes. Yeah, so there's five, or I think there's basically five data types, but I think there's, depending on the language, there might be even more. So I'm going to talk you through the basic ones in JavaScript. First of all, we have numbers. So we use data types because we want to differentiate the kind of data we handle. Imagine that you have to build a program where you can only use numbers. That would suck. So we want to have, firstly, numbers. So numbers can be anything, -100, 0, 3.14, whatever. In other programming languages like Ruby, we would call this one a float, and this one an integer. But in JavaScript, it's basically everything which is a number is actually a number. Then we have, like you said, then we have strings. So a string is basically anything which is text-based. You always denote a string by putting double quotes around it. A string, this is a string, but this is also a string, but this is an empty string, but it's still a string because it has double quotes. Then the next, yeah?
Why should computers separate those data types?
If you want to store and manipulate data, if you just have one data type, how are you going to make your program work? If you have like basically if you have ones and zeros, like just numbers, how is it going to make for you as a developer? So JavaScript basically is a high-level programming language, right? So it comes down from, you start at JavaScript, then it compiles back to C. From C it goes down to assembly, and then from assembly it goes down to like binary, and then from binary to transistors. So if you want to have just numbers, then you can basically code some stuff in binary or whatever. But if you want to use, if you want to make it more intuitive for yourself to use, and you want to write some programs which make sense to you as a human, it makes sense to differentiate between different data types. But we'll see later how we, for example, use strings and booleans and integers in our code to make it work. So the next guy I want to talk about is a boolean. So we can, a boolean always comes down to true and false. So it's either, so it's like in the computer, it's like the 0 and the 1. So it's true or false. So a boolean is not the same. Oh, let's exit this. So if I do this true, so this is a boolean, and if I do, these are two different things. So even though they look the same, if I do type of, which is a built-in function in JavaScript, which gives back to me the type of data I'm passing it, there are two different things. Just to make sure that you get that. You have any questions about that? So we use booleans. We'll see later if we're going to build conditions. We're going to use Boolean algebra to build conditions and branches. So then we have the string. So we have objects. Objects are basically they're a collection of items. So you have the first type of object, which in JavaScript, both these things have the name object. In Ruby, we would call this a hash or a dictionary. So you have to think about it like this. So you have, when you search for something inside a dictionary, you're always looking for a specific word, right? So that's the key. So for example, I want to find the word in the dictionary. Then I search for the W, I find the word, and then inside that word or behind the word there will be a value, so a description. So this works in the same way. You're making a key value storage of a specific element inside a list. And this is different from this one, which is actually just a list. So this is kind of like a dictionary, and this is kind of like just a list of values. So an array, we denote an array by square brackets, and we denote the hash or the dictionary object by curly brackets. And the array will always have, it's just a list of elements. So it starts at 0. In computer science, we start counting at 0, and then it goes on until infinite. So how can I access a specific value which I've stored inside of one of my objects? Let's try to do that. So let's say I want to let's store this in the variable array. I'm going to explain variables after this. So let's say I want to have the first value inside my array. How could I do that? So what we can do, like I said, it's basically it's a list of values. So if you want to access the first element inside our list, we can open the square brackets and insert a 0. So this always refers to the first element inside our array. And if I want to access the third value, I wouldn't do 3, but I would do 2 because it's 0, 1, true. So if I do console dot it will return to me Ringo. So it's the value stored at the index number 2. Does it make sense to you guys? No? If you have questions or remarks or anything, just fire at me, because if it's too fast or it's too slow, it's always hard to to notice. What's your question?
You lost me somewhere
Okay.
along the way.
All right. So what's unclear to you?
Like everything you just said.
Okay. So let's go back to the data types, right?
Yeah, I get that. I mean,
Yeah.
like the last bit. Like I understand numbers and booleans, and then I got lost somewhere between the curly brackets and Ringo.
Okay. So basically, before we start going on to the curly braces, so this is an array. An array is a specific type of, it's basically a list of values. So I have my array, and inside my list of values, I'm going to store these specific strings. But I could also, inside my list of values, I could do, at the first index, I'm going to store the number 1,
So
and then
is
here,
an array
number
a
2.
data type? There was some sort of jump that I didn't catch.
So an array is an object. So an array, arrays and hashes, so these two guys. Oh, where are we? Over here. An object is a data type. And then you have two different types of objects. You have the first one, which is a key value store, which is you denote with the curly braces, and then you have the second one, which is an array.
That's what I missed. So now it makes
Okay.
sense. I missed something somewhere.
Cool.
All right, thank you.
No worries. Okay, so for our array, we can access, if we do array 2. So now let's do, let's see, 500, 2,000, 20,000, 900, and 3. So let's say I want to access the value stored at index number 1, so that's 20,000. How do I access it? 1? Yeah. Oh, it's array 2. Yes. So inside my object, I can store other types, other data types. We'll see later how this comes in handy. Okay. So let's see how I can access my dictionary objects. Okay. So how could I access the value which is stored inside first name and log it to the console? So let's start with the console.log statements. And then we start with dictionary objects. So how can I access? I want to know what the first what value is stored inside the key first name. Just fire away. Say anything.
0.
0? Let's try. Oh, let's see, is this correct? So that doesn't work, unfortunately. So what I can do, because this is an unordered list, the array is always going to be ordered. So it starts at 0, index 0, and it goes on until infinity. So how many items you store in there. But this guy, this object is no order. There's no, it hasn't been sorted. It's just a key value store. If I change these two around, oh, so if I change this one to here, there's actually, it's still the same object with the same keys and the same values. So if I want to access a specific value which is stored inside one of my keys, what I can do is just take the key, and insert it inside the curly braces, or sorry, inside the square braces. Is that clear? Okay. Oh, other way. Okay, so until now we've seen numbers, booleans, strings, and objects. So then we have these two characters, which are null and undefined. So they're kind of special in saying that null is a specific value in JavaScript. In Ruby we would say nil, and it evaluates to basically to false. So if you have a variable or you have a function and it returns null, then basically it says that this is not correct. That's what it's basically saying. So if you're returning null, something is not right. And then undefined is also a special guy or a special girl. How do you want to see it? So undefined is, okay, I've made a variable, but it's just not defined yet. So it's kind of in the name. Okay, so I've been talking about variables, but I haven't actually said what a variable is. So variables in ES5, which is the implementation of JavaScript, which I'm going to explain to you today, we use the keyword var, which is short for variable. And then in ES6, that's the code we teach during the full stack course, we use const and let, because but these are kind of new implementations. So ES6 was brought out in 2016, ES5 was I think 2011. So this is still like the general standard, but this is more the future focused standard. So this is why we teach that in the actual bootcamp. To denote variables in ES6, you have to use const and let, which makes it a little bit more intricate to explain. So it's about scoping and functions and where you use the one or the other. So I'm not going to go into this. I'm just going to stick with ES5 and keep it simple.
And so then variables is the fifth data type.
Sorry?
So variables is the fifth data type?
No.
No, okay.
So variables, a variable is basically an empty box in your computer memory. And then inside that box, you can store a specific data type. So for example, I create my variable, so I name it, I always start with the keyword var, and then I give it a name. So I would say var first name. Okay, so I'm saying I'm creating a new variable and I'm naming it first name. So I create my box in the memory of my computer and I name it first name. And then if I want to store a value inside my box, I can use the assignment operator, which is the equal sign, and assign a specific value that I want to store inside the box in the memory of my computer by using this assignment operator. So now I'm storing the string, John, inside my var first name box. Does that make sense? Okay. So now I have inside my first name box, inside the computer memory, I have the value John. So if I want to log it to the user, if I want to get what's inside my box, I can do console.log. So that's what I did. Oh. Over here. So I'm saying, first I'm making a variable named array. And then that array is a list of elements. And then when I want to access a specific element, I say array index 1. So this guy. So let's start anew, and let's try to make some variables together. Let's do an exercise. Let's declare some variables and then concatenate two strings. You know what concatenation is? Okay, I'm gonna explain. Alright, so let's start. So we have var first name. So what's your first name?
Mine?
Yeah.
Francis.
Fran?
CIS.
CS? Yes. Okay. And then your last name? Oh.
Darracott. D-A-R-R.
D-A-R-R.
A-C.
A-C.
O-double-T.
O.
Double-T.
Double T. Okay. Right. Cool. So now I've declared, using the keyword var, I've said, okay, name this box inside my computer memory, name it first name, and store inside it the variable Francis. Or sorry, inside it store the string Francis inside my variable first name. And I'm doing the same for last name. So I'm taking the value, which is a string, Darracott, and storing it inside last name. And so I'm creating a small box inside my computer memory named first name and last name. So now, say for example that I want to console log these things. So I want to see what's inside these boxes.
Are these two separate boxes as well?
Yeah.
First name and last name, so.
Yeah. So they're two separate things. So if I want to take last name and console log it, it gives me the last name. And now for say that I want to concatenate these two things, how would I do that? So I want to create a new variable. Oh, and say var full name, and I want to assign a specific value to it. How could I do that? Yeah. Oh. Okay. Now let's oh. Cool. So it seems to work, but it's not exactly what we want. So how can we get a space in between the two variables? Any ideas? So it's actually quite simple. So what you can do, just take this. So create an empty string with a space inside. Well, no, it's not empty, but let's create a string with a space, with just one character of space inside. And add another concatenation. And then what we get is your name in the correct format. So before we continue, let me explain something about why we actually use this weird first and then capital N stuff. So in JavaScript, we use, when we declare variables, we use lower camel case but that's really dependent on which programming language you use, because for example in Ruby we would do lower snake case. So in JavaScript, every new word you have, so the first one starts with lowercase, and then every new word you have, you just put a capital on it. And then for Ruby, you just insert an underscore for each new word you have. So it's like, it's a convention. Your code does not break if you don't use lower camel case, because I think in this example here, we were using actually Ruby syntax to create a variable named, or create a key named last name. So it doesn't break, but the convention is to use this. Okay. Oh, missing a T. So you can write your variables basically in any way you want, but most of the time as a web developer or as a developer in general, you're going to be working together with other people on projects. So if you want to keep your fellow developers happy, it's good to respect the conventions. Okay, do you guys have any, before I continue, do you have any questions about this concatenation? So taking two variables and then basically stringing them together. All clear?
When you do like something really long, do you just keep adding pluses and then leave them?
Yeah. So I could also insert another string. Oh. Oh, and then we need a space here. And just keep on concatenating stuff together. And a specific feature of JavaScript is kind of weird, because Ruby doesn't have that. But if you add a, so this is basically a string, right? So it's just text. But if you add a number to it, it will convert it to a string. And that's something specific to JavaScript that some other programming languages don't have. And if I actually do, so if I do a computation, it does the computation and then converts it to a string and sticks it to the rest of the string. Which for me is kind of weird, but just how it works. In Ruby, this would throw an error saying that you can't add numbers to strings, because that's what you're actually doing. So you can't plus something, you can't count on a string. All right, so let's see. So conditions. Before I continue, do you have any questions about the first part about variables? Nope. Okay. So conditions are also what we call branching. So they work with the keywords if and else. So it's basically you use conditions during the whole day, every day of your life you're using conditions. So you're saying, for example, you get up in the morning, you want to go to work, or you're coming here or whatever, and you say, okay, if the weather is rainy, then I'm going to take an umbrella. Oh, and then so you're basically creating a way for your computer program to behave. So it always starts with the keyword if. So let's open a new JS bin. So condition always starts with the keyword if. Then we have opening parentheses, and we have the variable which we're going to check. In this case, we're checking weather. And then we're checking if it's equal. So in JavaScript, we use triple equal signs. And if it's equal to rainy. So let's declare a variable and say var weather equals sunny. So nothing's happening. And that's because this if statement is checking if this condition, so the thing that's between the parentheses, between the round brackets, if this is true, then I'm going to execute this code that's below. So how a condition works is if keyword, then condition, and then if it's true, we're going to do stuff. So if I change this to rainy, then the value I've stored inside weather is rainy. And so then here in my condition I'm checking, is this, so is weather, is the value which is stored inside weather equal to this value? Then execute this code. So now I get the feedback, yes, take an umbrella. So in JavaScript, we use the triple equal signs and not the double equal signs. In lots of other programming languages, we just use this, so double equals, if we're checking if something equals the other thing. But in JavaScript, we don't do that, and that's because basically, if you do 1 equals 1, it will return true. Even though this is not even the same data type, it's still going to evaluate the true, because it tries to match on the basis of what's inside. So it first, or it converts this one to a string and then checks if they're correct, or it converts this one to a number and then checks if they're the same. So if you want to be absolutely 100% sure that something is exactly the same as the other one, never use double equals, but use triple equals. So we can do oh. So use triple equals, it's safer. Have any questions about basic loop or basic condition? Nope.
What are the slashes for? So,
This one's?
yeah.
So if I put these slashes in front, it converts the code that I've written to a comment, so it doesn't execute it. So it's just stuff I wanna like have as feedback to myself, but not actually to execute the code. So if you're writing a computer program and, for example, you write a really complicated function, and you want to have some documentation about that function, then you could add like, okay, my function does this and this and this. So you can add like inline documentation to the stuff that you're writing. So in this case, I'm just making sure that.
Make it easier to read. When
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So you can pinpoint what you need.
So if I run this now, it does nothing. But if I run this now, it will give an error
Yeah.
because it's executing the code. So it's converting this stuff into a comment.
So it makes it live.
Sorry?
So it makes it live, and then without you can add in.
Yeah. So if you don't have them,
Yeah.
it's actual code, and if you do, it's just basically stuff that doesn't get read by the computer program.
I can do that in anything. Like I could do that in HTML, not just JavaScript. Like leave notes for myself.
I think there is a way to comment out every type of code, but I don't know if it's it's exactly this. I think in CSS it's something like this. So you have like this and then blah blah and then this. And in Ruby it's something else again. So if you want to do it quickly, what I do is command on my Mac and then a /. So it automatically takes any type of code and converts it to a comment. All right. So that was the basic loop. So now we have we've created just one branch for our computer to go. So if it's rainy, do some stuff. But that's kind of basic. So let's give it another condition. Because if I'm saying, so if it's rainy, please take an umbrella. But any other case, so if it's sunny, I'm actually not doing anything. So maybe it's nice if we add another road for our computer to take. And we do that by adding the keyword else. So now, if it's rainy, I'm going to log take an umbrella. And all other cases, so anything else, so if this weather variable, even if it's an empty string, I'm going to take my sunglasses.
Can you quickly tell me how to make a curly bracket with my MacBook?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Here?
Wait, you just covered them all. I didn't see
Here,
you.
these two. So you have the square brackets over here,
Okay.
and then
So just
shift.
square
Yeah.
bracket. Thank you.
Okay, so if it's rainy, take an umbrella. All other cases, take your sunglasses. So, like, I think most of the places in the world, this doesn't really add up, because there's more cases than just being rainy or being sunny. So we can add another condition, and basically we can add as many conditions as we want. So let's say that it's really stormy outside. We can give another condition for our computer to take. So if we do else if, and let's get this over here. So now we've created 3 roads where we can go. So if it's rainy, take an umbrella. Else if it's stormy, stay at home. And else, so if it's not rainy or stormy, you can take your sunglasses. So if I do stormy over here, I'm telling myself to stay at home. And all other cases, I'm still taking my sunglasses, which to me also doesn't really make sense. So you can create a base condition, so that's the if keyword. Then you create another condition where a specified condition needs to be met. So this condition needs to be met in order to execute the code which is below it. And then all other cases do this.
If you added another else if, could you add in another whatever say, or do you need another piece of code after that?
So I mean like this.
Yes, just if there's a full, okay.
Yeah. You can also string conditions together, but we'll see how to do that in a minute. So for each specific condition that is different from the other one, I can do an else if statement. So else if weather is beachy. Okay. So what I'm doing, I'm basically just creating roads, creating paths for my computer program to take. You have any questions about this? So it always starts with the if keyword, then a condition, then so it's if keyword condition, and if that condition is true, do some stuff.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So like here you have like variable weather equals beachy, and then you have your semicolon at the end. But these statements here, I don't know if they're properly called statements, but the semicolon isn't the last thing. The curly bracket is. What is going on there?
So I think we should also add a semicolon over here. See. So this is basically one block of code. So you have this is the beginning, right? So this is one statement, and then if this is true, then you're opening kind of like a mini function. So you're saying open curly brace usually means okay, I want my computer program to go do some stuff, and then if that's true, please console log this statement, and then I have a semicolon because this is on itself one executable piece of code, and then you add a semicolon. But yeah, JavaScript and semicolons is like hell. It's sometimes especially when we're going to build a function which has a loop and a condition and return statements, then you have a lot of semicolons and stuff and round brackets, square brackets, and it's basically a nightmare.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to figure. I don't know much about coding, right? But to me, like when I look at this, it's just intuitive that semicolon means like end of statement. So why is I don't understand why the curly brackets outside of the semicolon, right? If that ends the statement, why is the curly bracket outside?
So this semicolon ends this specific statement, so this line.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't end the whole statement. It just ends this line.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because this in itself is already a specific statement. So you're saying inside my if condition, I'm creating a condition, and then I'm saying this is the stuff I want to do between my curly braces, and then this is the statement I want to execute, and then we cut that statement off with a semicolon. Okay, any other questions about conditions? Nope. Ready. So this was, I think, what you were talking about, like trying to string conditions together. So we can use Boolean algebra to string conditions without creating a new line. So we use the keywords double ampersand to denote and. We use the keywords or the key. No, it's not really words, but symbols. Double pipes to denote the keyword or, and this exclamation mark means the exact opposite of what I want. So let's see how this works. So we have the logical AND, which is denoted by the double ampersand. So if I have a statement and I want to check if this statement is true, so I have, for example, A and B, and I'm checking if A and B are true, then I'm going to return true. So if A is false and B is false, of course it's going to return false. If A is false and B is true, it's also going to return false because I want both of my statements to be true. And then for A true, B false, it's the same. And so only in the case that A is true and B is true, I can do some stuff. So in this case, where we have So we have two variables, rain and wind. And then if rain and wind evaluate to true, then I'm going to console log something. So in this case, yes, really stay at home because it's rainy and it's windy. But if either of these is false, it's not working anymore. So I need both my conditions to be true. So in that way you can string together different conditions without creating an else if. Because I could also do if rain, okay this, else if wind, okay this. So only in the case that both of them are true, please give me some feedback. And then we have the or. So the or is, please return to me something based on if either A or B. So A or B equals true. So we have, if we have A false and B false, then yeah, it's going to be false. If we have A false and B true, then it's going to return true. So in comparison, the AND operator needs both of them to be true. The OR operator just needs one of either to evaluate the true for the whole statement to return true. So if either of these two is true, my result will be true. And of course, if they're both true, then yes, it's going to be true. So in this case, where I have a variable named day, and then I'm checking if day is Saturday or the day is Sunday, then it's the weekend. So I'm logging to my user, yes, it's the weekend, because either of these, one of these two is true. So the day is Saturday. And if we change it to Sunday, then this first condition is going to be false, but because the other one is true, I'm still executing my code. But if if it's Monday, then really stay at home. And there it's not the weekend anymore.
Okay, where do you get double bars? Oh, here I see it.
Yes. I'm going to, if you want, I'm going to send you the presentation afterwards. But if you want to type along, that's also fine.
Yeah, you'll lose me if I don't.
Okay, so then we have the logical not, which is basically saying, okay, it's the opposite of what I want. So if A is true, then the result is false, and the other way around. And we can do this in two ways. So we can say, okay, if it's sunny, so sunny equals true, and if it's not sunny, so not sunny, then cancel the beach. So we can apply the logical not to the specific variable, or we can check if it does not equal something. And in this case, it's kind of confusing because now we are using 2 equals and not 3. But yeah, that's just JavaScript. So there's 2 ways to do this, by applying it directly on the variable or checking if the variable does not equal something. Okay. So we've seen some conditions. So let's try to put this stuff into action. So let's say I have a few names. Let's open a new JS bin. Let's say I have a few names, and I want to check if the first character of those names starts with a B. So first we start by declaring some variables. So we can do var ben equals Ben, var Bob equals Bob, and var John equals John. Oh. So how can I check if the first character inside my variable Ben is a capital B? So the syntax is always going to be if condition So how do we start? I want to check if the first letter of my variable Ben, so if Ben for dot, and then the first letter is equal to a b. So we always start with the keyword if, right? So then what is our condition?
Maybe like letter 1 or something.
Yeah. So to access a specific character inside a variable, we can use the square brackets and then the number of where the index of the character is. So if you compare it to an array is a list of elements, any types of elements or variables or whatever, and a string is basically also just a list of characters. So you can access it. You can access the first value by using the 0 index. If I want to access the third value, I can do this number 2. So if I do 0 equals b, then I'm going to do something. Let's get this over here. So what am I going to do? I want to take the whole name and do something with it, right? I want to display a list of all the names that start with a capital B. So what we can do perhaps is create a new variable named bnames and say that my variable is an empty string. And then how can I add the name which I'm checking to my string? You remember concatenation?
Ben plus Bob.
Sorry?
Ben plus Bob.
So now I'm just inside my, so I'm just checking Ben first, and then we're going to check Bob, and then we're going to check John. So if Ben, if the first character of Ben equals the B, I'm going to take my bname string and say bnames is equal, or bnames assign the value of bnames to bnames plus the value which is stored inside Ben. Does that make sense? Oh, and then of course I need to console log. So first, my bnames is an empty variable. It's an empty string. And then I'm checking. So if the first character of Ben, so this character, if that's a capital B, so if the first character of Ben is a capital B, then I'm reassigning the variable bnames with this. So it's going to be the existing value bnames plus the variable Ben. And then if I want to check this for Bob, I can do this. I want to do this for John. I'm going to do this. Does that make sense? So I'm checking for each of the names. I'm checking if the first character is equal to a B. And then if that's so, I'm going to put the name, which I'm checking, and append it, concatenate it to the already existing bnames array, or bname string. So here I'm checking, okay, if the first character of Ben is a B, then assign this variable or concatenate this value to the bname string, and I'm doing the same for Bob, and I'm doing the same for John. So in this case, Ben and Bob do both start with a capital B. So I'm assigning those values to our bnames string. And then for John, this statement evaluates to true, so I'm not adding it to our string. But it's not totally right yet. So how do we get a space in between these two values? We already checked this, right?
Yeah.
Can we just add a string with empty space? Yeah. So we can do okay. But now we have a space over here. That's not what we want. So there's a handy, nifty built-in method in JavaScript, which is called trim. And it takes, you can execute trim on a string. And it takes all the trailing and leading white space, so every white space in front or after the string, and it just removes it. So now we get a nice looking string. But can you guys maybe criticize this code a bit? Because to me this is really repetitive. So how can we fix this? Because I'm declaring 3 independent variables. Then I'm checking for each of the variables. I'm doing the same statement. So imagine that I have 100 names. I would need to declare 100 name variables and then do 100 if statements. That's just ridiculous. So any ideas on how to make this a little bit less stupid and make it a little bit more automated? Yay, loops. So a loop starts with for or while. And a loop is basically going to iterate over an array. So say that we have an array filled with values, so a student's array filled with names. So if we want to take the length of this array, we can use a method built into JavaScript called length, which will return us with the value 3. So let's try this out. If this works. Oh. Okay. Oh. So if we console.log the length of this array, it will return 3. So how can we, instead of declaring independent variables, so now we're going to store our variables inside a list. How can we make sure that we don't have to write for each name we have to do another if statement? We can use the for loop. So the for loop basically always begins like this. So it's a keyword for. Then we have an init condition. The init condition is saying, okay, for, I'm starting my loop. For variable I, which I'm just saying, I can also name this strawberry or volcano. I'm just saying for my variable I, start at 0. Then afterwards, after the initialization condition, we add a semicolon. Then we have our break condition. So as long as I is smaller than the length of my array, so in this case it will be students. So as long as I, let me copy this, is smaller than 3, keep incrementing I by 1. So here we have our initialization, we have our break condition, and we have our iteration count. So starting at 0 until I has reached the size of the length of the array, keep incrementing by 1. So, and then inside my loop, I have a statement which logs the student's array, or the value found in the student's array, at the specific index. So do you guys have any idea what this will return? So when we run this code, it takes each of the values stored inside my array and returns them to the console. So I'm saying for starting with index 0 until the length of the array, keep increasing this number, keep increasing my index by 1, and then log to the console from my students array the value found at the specific index. So I'm building a loop which will loop until my specified break condition. So until the length of the array the index is the same as the length of the array. Keep looping and keep adding 1 and keep logging the values found at the specific index which I'm at in my loop right now. You guys have any questions about this?
If you add on more names, that code will still work.
So let's try. So if we add, I don't know, Bob. And so no matter how long my array is, it will keep iterating until the length of the I is equal to the length of the array. So in this way, we can have an endless list of values inside one array, and just using a loop, we can console log each one of them instead of having to do, okay, give me number 0, then okay, give me number 1, etc., etc. So it makes our code way less redundant. Any questions about the for loop? All clear? Right. So how can we use this for loop to make our previous program a little bit less redundant? So now what we're doing, we're declaring individual variables and then doing individual if statements. So how can we just use one array and then have a for loop and one if statement? Point 1, I guess, would be for names array, and then we can just insert the values Ben, Bob, and John, instead of declaring them individually. No. So now we have one line of code instead of 3. It's already way better. So how do we start the for loop again? So we have the keyword for, and then we have our initialization condition, which is for I equals 0. Keep looping, so do names array dot, so until I reaches the same value as the length of the array, keep looping, and then say do +1. And now all we need to do is just take this stuff, put it in here, get rid of this. And then instead of doing Ben and then getting the first character of Ben, we're going to take the names array, take from the names array the index found at I, and then access the first character. And then here we're not adding specifically Ben, but what we're doing is taking the name found at this index. Let's see if this works. Hey. So now instead of having 3 if statements or infinite if statements for each name that we have just an array with names inside it. Then we're looping over the array and then taking if, so for initialization condition for variable I equals 0, keep looping until I equals the same length as the names array, and keep incrementing I by 1. And then inside my loop, I'm asking, is the value found at index I, so starting at 0, is the value found at index I 0? The first letter of that, so B, is that a B? Add this name, so add Ben, to my existing name string. Any questions? Okay. So then we have, next to the for loop, we also have the while loop, which basically does exactly the same. Only the syntax is different. So if we do, instead of doing, where were we? So this for loop over here, instead of starting with the keyword for, and then making some initialization statements, a break condition, and incrementation, and then console logging, we start with a var I outside. Then we do while the I is smaller than the length of the array. Please log my students at this index, and then do a +1. So it's the same, it just depends on what you want to use. And it depends on what the program, well, what feels best to use in this specific case. But the output is exactly the same. So if I run this, I get the same list of names. Righty. Oh. Okay. So we've seen until now data types, numbers, booleans, strings, objects. Then we've seen variables and how to declare them. Box in the memory, we store some value inside. We've seen conditions, so if something is true, then do some stuff. We've seen some Boolean algebra with the weird keywords double ampersand, double pipes, and the not. We've seen loops with for and while. And now we're going to dive into functions. So we're going to try and use functions to make the code that we've written until now even nicer. So what is a function? A function is basically a black box where you can insert some code and then using a return statement give some other code or some other values back to the user. So we always start with the keyword function. We give our function a name, and then the parameters are basically what you're going to put inside our black box. Then inside the body, you're going to do some data manipulation, so the stuff that you actually want to do with the data. So you're going to, I don't know, manipulate it in a specific way that you find nice. And then using the return keyword, you're going to return a specific value to your user. So functions are really nice to make your code even less redundant. And what's also a nice thing about functions is that you can call them from anywhere in your code. So you just have to write a function once, and then if you require the file and the function is accessible from the other part of code where you're at the moment, you can just call the name of the function and then give the parameters and then get the desired outputs. So in the case that we want to, for example, create a function that takes two parameters, so it takes first name and last name. So we start with the keyword function. We call our function full name. It takes a first name and then it takes a last name. And then we're saying, okay, we're creating a new variable inside our function. So inside the function body, we're saying, okay, create a new variable name. And this name, please assign to the name the values found in first, so in the parameter first, plus a space, like we already did, and the parameter last. And then lastly, we're returning the name. So we're returning the variable which we just declared. So let's try to do this. And let's see how this makes our code that we wrote at the beginning. Oh, not this one, but this one. A little bit nicer. So in this case, we had a variable which is named full name, and then we're concatenating these two things. So instead of doing that, we put basically the same code inside our function. So how do we use these two variables? How do we use first name and last name? Insert them into our function and get some return. We can quite easily do that by calling the function. So we can call a function by specifying its name, the name that we gave it, and then inserting as arguments two things which are going to be inserted into the parameters of the function. So in this case, what we would do is we're calling the function, so we specify the name. So we say full name. Oh, no caps. Then we're specifying these two variables because we want to give first name. We're going to get the value which is stored inside the variable first name, and then the value which is stored inside the variable last name. So we're going to give to the function full name, first name, last name. And let's store this for, let's say, because I can't declare a variable twice. So I'm saying my variable real name is equal to the return statement of my function full name. So here I'm calling full name, and I'm inserting these two variables, so Francis and Derricott. I'm taking these two variables, so first name and last name, and I'm passing them to my function. And then inside my function I'm saying, okay, create a new variable named name, and then concatenate these two things, so first and last, and add a space in between, and then return to where this function was called, the variable name. So inside my real name, I'm storing basically the return value of my function. So if I want to then console log real name, I'm logging the return of this function. So my function gets called, it inserts some data, it manipulates some data in the function body, and then it returns the name. I'm storing it here, and then I'm logging it. But in this case, now we've built a function to concatenate two strings. It's not really that nice. It's something which we already did in one line of code. So instead of doing this, let's try to implement a function in the exercise we did before. So we had, let's see, where's my JS bin? So here. So the function always starts with keyword function, then the name, then parameters, and we open the function. So we do some stuff with parameters. So parameters are basically our data. And then we return something. So let's build a function which takes two arguments, so the array of names, and then instead of having to filter always on the same letter, let's make it dynamic, and let's make it be able to filter on a specific character. So if we do function, so I'm starting with the keyword function, and I'm saying filter names. Then I'm giving it two parameters. So firstly, I'm going to give it data, so names array. Then secondly, I'm going to do a character I want to filter on, so character. And then let's open the function. So what are we going to do? Basically this whole part, right? So we're going to take this, store it in here. Oh. So how do I call my function again? We can just specify the name. So let's take, I named my function filter names. So if I do filter names, what do I input? I gave it two parameters, right? So that's, instead of doing this, specifying names. Okay, so I'm giving it the names array and then the character I want to filter on. So that's going to be, in this case, the B. And then here this is going to be array, because inside my function I don't know what names array is. I just have the two parameters which I specified. So in order to make it dynamic, I may name this array. This one as well. And this one as well. And then I'm not going to statically filter for the B, but I'm going to dynamically filter for the character, which I specify when I call my function. So let's say var filtered names equals the return statement of my filter names function. So if I do return bnames, okay. And then I'm console logging the return of my filtered names function. So you guys think this will work? Still works? Do you also see the use of this? Like why would I wrap this in a function? So say that I have another data set. So instead of having to write another if statement and another for loop, what I can do is just say that instead of taking the first data set, I'm just taking the second one, and I want to filter on the x, and it returns us something based on another data set and with another filter character. So it makes our code way more usable across basically anything, because you can just specify the different arguments you're giving to the function, and it still executes everything in the same order. Only you don't have to write your code twice. Okay, do you have any questions about the function? Because what we see here is basically everything you need to know about in the basic part of programming language, because we have a variable declaration. We have a function definition. Then we have a for loop. Then we have a condition. And then we're returning something and we're calling the function. So if you have an idea of how this works, then you have a basic idea of what JavaScript does. So do you guys have any questions about this before I continue with some showcasing stuff about jQuery and the DOM? Nope? Right. So let's see. Okay, so the DOM. The DOM stands for Document Object Model. And basically it's just a thing inside your browser which handles your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and creates a website from it. So it takes all the whole tree structure which is requested when you do a request from your browser to a specific server, and converts all that stuff into a nice looking website for you. So you all know what this is, right? This is a tree. It's kind of basic, but in computer science we often think about trees upside down. And that's because in computer science you start with one parent, and then each parent can have one or many children, but each child only has one parent, which is kind of sad, but that's just the way it works. So in this case, this parent has 2 children, this parent only has 1 child, this parent has 2 children. So this might seem a little bit weird, like this upside down tree stuff, but this is actually already how your computer works. So you start from a root folder, and then you have one or many children, so in this case it's 1. And then this C disk then has several children, and so on and so on and so on. And it's the same for Mac. You just have your folder structure is already a tree, only it's usually horizontal instead of seeing it from top to down. All right. So in an HTML document, it's basically the same. So you always start with one like super above parent tag, which is the HTML tag. Then you have a head and a body. So these two. And then each child can have 1 or many or 0 children. So in this case, we started the HTML tag. It has 2 children, head and body. Then we have a title, which is the child of the head, and then we have two children from the body. So an H1 and a P tag. Oh, stay where you are. Okay, so if we look at the HTML from the Le Wagon website, and we close all these tags. Oh. So you can see that we always start with the HTML tag, so that's the same for every website. And then inside the HTML tag there are lots of other tags. And then in this case we have our head and our body here. So our head then exists of a lot of meta tags and links and a lot of stuff. And then we have our body class. And our body class exists also of many children. And what you can do, you can just, if you open the inspector, you can basically just fool around with the HTML and remove some stuff. I can remove the nav bar, so now I don't have a nav bar anymore. But this is all kind of static, and I'm doing it by myself. And no worries, if you reload the page, everything's back. So you can, this is basically the DOM. So it's the document object model. This is what's loaded on when you do the request to the server. You get all this stuff, and the DOM converts it into what you actually see, which is this website. And like I said, you can just screw around and remove stuff and add stuff as you wish.
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
So when you're talking, I'm not a computer scientist or a developer, but I think I've already given myself away in that. When you're referring to it as an upside-down tree, why is it an upside-down tree? Because that doesn't make sense to me. Because it looks like you're developing a family tree and it's right side up.
Sorry?
Right? A family tree looks like this.
Yeah.
Like grandparents or great-grandparents, grandparents. So why is it an upside-down tree? Because it looks like a right-side up tree to me. Why is it referenced that way?
That's just the way it's referenced.
If that's a family tree, it's right side up. It's not upside down.
And with a family tree, yeah, that's true. But it's basically because I didn't think of this, how do you say, reference. But it's basically because you start at one point and then you branch out, right? So
I'm just thinking of it as a literal tree. Okay, and then relationship.
so you have basically, this is the parent, right? So and then you have one or many children, and those children have children. So this is a child of this, and then of this guy, and then of this, and then all comes back to one parent. So I think that's what the reference is about.
Okay, and then if you go back to where
Which one?
that,
Yeah.
the one under it.
This one.
So relationship-wise, like I understand this concept that the HTML is the parent and the head is the child and the body are siblings, and the head is the child of the title. But is there like a reference of the HTML relationship to the title? Like would you refer that to grandparents, or how would you reference? Like how would you refer to that?
How do you mean? You mean like, so what you can see here in the bottom, so you can see this, it's not the grandparent. I think you can, but you can do, when you're browsing through HTML, you can do with JavaScript also like parent or like node.parent node, and then if you do that twice, you can get to like the grandparent, but I think there's no actual reference to like grandparents or great grandparents.
There's a way that it's just no, like so. It'd be
Yeah,
like
so
parent,
each of these things is an HTML node.
Yeah.
And then if you want to reach like the parent, so if we go a few levels deeper, so let's go inside here, you can still see each of the parent nodes of each of the elements. So this guy is nested inside here, and then inside the container, inside the overlay, inside the body, and inside the HTML. So there's a way to go back from the lowest level up until like the root, but I think it takes a lot of JavaScript code to get there. So you can do things like, let's see, parent node.
Oh, node, not no. Okay.
And then, so you want to get the element based on the ID of the element, and then you can do the parent node and then the name of that specific node. So there's lots of possibilities to go up in the tree, but let's not go too deep into that. Any other questions about the HTML tree? Okay. So if you want to fool around with JavaScript and jQuery, as you just saw, I can just statically remove some stuff. I can basically remove the whole website if I want. But that's just me pressing a button. So how can I make sure that content is dynamically loaded and on click there's stuff happening, and when I click on one of these reviews I get a nice pop-up. All this stuff is handled by JavaScript. And before we like in the past, I think 10 years ago, 12 years ago it was, I think in 2015, jQuery was developed by John Resig, and since then also by other people. And it was developed mainly because back in the day there was no real good standard for JavaScript. So you had a lot of, first you had Internet Explorer, which was a really dumb browser, and it basically, you couldn't open tabs. You could just, every new website you would have to open a new window. It made no sense. And then a few years later you had Firefox, and then eventually you had Chrome. But in the beginning days, so like 8 to 10 years ago, there was no real conformity amongst the code. So you had the code, basically if you wanted the code to feature in JavaScript for Internet Explorer, you have to do it once, and then again for Chrome, and then again for Firefox, which kind of sucks. So jQuery solved that problem by jQuery is basically a really large JavaScript library. So what you can do using jQuery, it solved the problem by making a lot of functions available to you in a quick and easy way. So as you can see, it's just lots of code, just a lot of JavaScript. But using jQuery, let's remove this min to make it a little bit more readable. So as you can see, it's just someone took a lot of effort to write this to make all the differences between browsers disappear. So we're 12 years later, but jQuery is still in use because of its ease of use and because of the fact that well, it brings with it animations, it brings with it ease of use, and it's a nice library to use. So compared to writing some JavaScript, so if I want to select this element, so this, and I want to do it in pure JavaScript, I would do document.get element by ID, and then this. Then I get this node, this HTML node. If I want to do this with jQuery, what I can do is quite easily take the $sign, add the ID, and it returns me the same element. So before ES 2016, you didn't have these kind of functions. So you get basically, if you wanted to select some stuff inside the document object model, you would almost have to use jQuery. And next to having to use it, using just this seems a little bit nicer than having to write, I don't know, 2 really long words. So you can use this selector of jQuery, like the $sign. So you can use it to select any type of element. You can use it to select actual elements. So this refers to the HTML elements. So a p tag or a div or anything which is inside the DOM. Or you can use it to select a specific ID, like I just did. Or you can use it to select a specific class. So an ID is denoted with the hashtag, and a class is denoted with .red, or the dot notation. So if we have a look at the elements inside the console, so as you can see, this element, which is the button, has the ID language menu toggle, and it has, does it have a class? So yeah, and it has the class drop-down toggle. So if I want to select the same element, but then on the base of class, I can do drop-down toggle. And then it gets me all the elements which have this class.
Dan?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. We're already like half an hour past.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm almost done. I'm almost done.
Yeah, no
Cool.
worries.
All right. So you can do some pretty nifty animations with jQuery. So what we can do, so let's get this container. So this div has the class features container. So if I want to select it, what I can do is just insert it here, add the dot because it's a class, close it, and then when I want to slide it up, it just disappears with a nice animation. And then when I want to get it back, I can do slide down. So jQuery brings with it lots of like built-in cool stuff, which also makes it relevant to still use, even though it's like a 12-year-old library. And then you can do dot, oh, not hide, but dot hide, and it disappears. So what will be the keyword? Show it again. So there's loads more keywords in jQuery which you can use which are really intuitive to use to make your website a little bit more dynamic, which is really nice. And having to code this stuff by yourself in JavaScript just takes way longer. So let's see. Then we can attach events. Let me just give you a really quick look of what that looks like. And then I'm going to save the Ajax part for another time. So for example, I want to select language menu toggle, which is that button over here. So I'm adding to my language menu toggle, I'm adding an event listener. So an event listener is inside your browser. There's lots of events which are built in, which JavaScript can listen for. So what I'm saying right now, add to this little button over here, add on click a function which does alert. And an alert is a pop-up message which you've probably already seen multiple times. So if I click on this, now I get an alert. But you can also do this with, instead of doing alert, you can do confirm. So then you get two messages. So there's lots of stuff which you can quite easily code with jQuery, which is really nice. So let's see what I have left. Yeah, I wanted to talk about Ajax, but I'm just going to do a real quick introduction. I'm not going to showcase anything. So Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It was the big company started using it like 10 years ago. And remember when Gmail was introduced and it was like the first email service where without refreshing the page, it would get you new messages. That makes use of Ajax. So it's all the content which is basically normal now. So every big website uses it. All the content that gets reloaded without you actually doing a server request, so reloading the page, that's Ajax. So it's asynchronous JavaScript doing requests for you. And okay, I can show it really quick with Google. So on each keystroke that I do, it gets you new stuff. So if I do L, it gets me a list. So this is already a request, which is the L is sent to the server of Google. If we check this, now these are all the requests which are done when I load the page. So let's get rid of them. And then each character which I type, a new request is sent, and that's handled by Ajax. And you can also do, this is a GET request, so it's get me some stuff from the server, but you can also do POST requests with Ajax. And so yeah, basically if you want to be a web developer and do anything, you will have to use some JavaScript sooner or later. So it's totally worth the effort to learn something about it. These are some cool resources, so you can have a look at this presentation if you want, by Douglas Crockford. And then there's a book about JavaScript, which is a nice summarization of the good parts. And it's if you compare this to the whole big JavaScript books, you can see like how many shitty parts there are. And yeah, Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a nice front-end library, which also makes use of jQuery. And I would, if you guys are going to do some web development, check this out because it's worth the effort. It's built by Twitter, and they have some really nice, it's similar to like jQuery, but then for CSS. All right, so that was it. You guys have any questions? No? Yeah.
When did you start to learn code by yourself?
Sorry?
When did you start programming by yourself?
Yeah, basically I did the bootcamp 2 years ago. And then since then, so I did a traineeship afterwards for 3 months. And then I worked for a company for a little over than a year. And now I've been working for Le Wagon for 3-4 months. So, Le Wagon